Welcome back to the podcast. Very special episode for you guys today. We have the first guest on the show, Michael Muscatello. Pretty sure I pronounced that right. Uh, would you just like to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about Alchemy, the venture you started?
Sure. So thanks everyone. Michael Muscatello. Thanks R.E. for having me on. I'm really excited. This is the first time that I'm a guest on a podcast. So Alchemy had a fairly organic start. It wasn't something that was planned at all. It began with a few self-development courses I had taken. I became extremely attracted to that field, and I ended up taking a coaching course, and I developed some skills as a life coach. Now, this is a role that I've kind of slotted into for a lot of my friends and family throughout the course of my time being a human here. And it was really nice to have a process to put the magic to in terms of what I brought as far as creating space for people, being able to hear them, being able to understand them, empathize, really give them room to speak about things in a long form, in a long format that, taking some of the pressure of life off, helping people figure out what it is that they really want. At the same time, I had begun doing some graphic notation. So graphic notation is where you convert paragraphs into pictures. You actively listen to something that's going on and you essentially create a mind map or infographics that are based on what's happening. Now, there's some corporations that do this for other corporations. And they'll have, in order to increase engagement between individuals, get the creative juices flowing, boost retention, they use images. So we're harnessing both parts of our brain, which are visual and verbal. Not that that's the only way to break the brain down. I don't mean to be reductionist in anything that I say. But what I started doing is graphic notation inside of client coaching sessions. And one of the things that became really interesting that I noticed was that the self-organizing. In a sense, I would, to a certain point, try to organize and create a structure of the conversation, images, and something that we, maybe we'll get into is that I do have the people that I coach as a part of the discovery process and getting to know them. I have them draw 4 symbols that come to mind, talk about how they represent them in one way or the other, what they mean to them ultimately. So we start by building a skeleton out of the conversation and out of the symbols that the person has to talk about. And I started finding that at the end of these sessions, these images were self-organizing. There would be narratives captured within the pictures on the page that we talked about that I didn't consciously put down. I didn't consciously draw. And we would start beginning to find interactions between different images and different sections of the drawing that had deep personal meaning for them. So I decided to name my coaching organization Alchemy, AlcheMe, because the aging process at its core is that the individual has absolutely everything that they need within themselves to find whatever peace they seek, what is it they want to do, the list of desires that somebody might be after is kind of endless. But at the end of the day, the individual has everything within themselves, and the coaching process is all about that person, right? Coaching is not about giving advice. Coaching is not about critiquing or necessarily giving direction. It's about asking open-ended, empowering questions that allow the individual to dig deeper in and uncover what it is that they really want. So the thing that I bring to coaching that's a little bit different with Alchemy is the graphic portion, where we're harnessing both parts of the brain, and the right brain tends to be a little bit more dormant. We're interacting a little bit more with the subconscious, I've noticed. A big fan of Jungian philosophy and Jungian psychoanalysis, and the study of the unconscious, the study of the inner child, the soul. There's so many different names for it, and there's a few technical versions as well. But essentially, the part of us that is very much interactive and participative in our lives that isn't us necessarily, but it comes from us, right? The parts of ourselves that are unconscious, not that they're anything below consciousness. In fact, I would say that the unconscious is in some ways is more like the superconscious, and we're kind of like the little tip of the iceberg, that sticks out on the surface. But Yeah, and well, so that's my organization, Alchemy. Through the process of producing alchemical artifacts for individuals that they can draw inspiration from over time and see their greatest qualities listed out in an imagistic format. I've also developed a bit of a knack for drawing, and so in addition to offering the coaching sessions, I also do art commissions for people. Whatever it is that they're looking for, it's pretty open ended. And then I do offer standard coaching as well that doesn't involve what I've dubbed the symbol mapping process. So yeah, that's a little bit about Alchemy and its inception, how I got here. It really started in my sales training class where I first gave a symbolism exercise as just an icebreaker to a group of individuals who didn't know each other. And man, I certainly didn't expect it to turn into what it did, but we had people in the class that were crying, that were consoling each other, that were standing up, making valorous exclamations of, this is something that I believe in, and this is what's important to me, and this is why I try to do things a certain way. So anyway, that's a little bit further back before I really had any kind of a conception of coaching or the alchemy process. But that's essentially where it all began.
That's awesome. And it's just like the way that you can use visuals to really create an emotional connection and also just like learn more about yourself. Like I personally do that with poetry. I'm not like a very gifted drawer. I know I've seen a lot of your drawings. So a question I would ask is, say I was doing the symbol mapping with you and my drawing skills are terrible. Do you think that that really matters? Could I still get the same like emotional connection out of it, the same like meaning out of it, even if my drawing isn't that good?
So good is, first of all, good is subjective. But in all seriousness, the worse it is, the better. The more simple, the more straightforward it is, the more straightforward that the contours and the forms are, the better. The more that we can kind of take a look at it and break it down into a usable format for you. So as far as the individual's drawing skills, no. And to be clear, I certainly share the symbol mapping process with others. I don't think that it's something that's unique to me that I can provide to others. I actively seek to teach others to perform this for themselves. But at the end of the day, you're drawing 4 simple symbols and I'm taking it the rest of the way from there. After that, you get to be the guest star of your own episode of a coaching session where you get to talk about pretty much anything that you want to talk about. And of course, I have questions that are tailored to help you make some progress, open up some different ways of thinking about things that you may not have access for. But if you can draw, a plus sign or a spiral or whatever else, comes to mind, that's all that we need from there. No, it doesn't matter what the person's innate artistic ability is.
That's awesome. I feel like that's a good segue into kind of a deeper discussion that I wanted to get into. Basically, like the thesis of this episode, you'd say the main idea is basically of like, I don't believe that time is like exists or like time is an illusion. I think I'd love to clip that and just get that clip, but I believe that a more accurate way to say it is that time is art. How would you respond to that statement that time is art?
Time is art. Well, time is art. So I can certainly get down with time being an illusion, but it's interesting that you bring up time because I've really been mending my relationship with time as of late. A lot of philosophers talk about time as just that, being an illusion, right? It's an illusory concept that we utilize to create, right? And people almost kind of, they crap on time. Like time is this thing that everybody's always fighting against. Everybody's always running out of time. Well, I like to think we're running into time. Our consciousness is actively meeting time. And at that convergence point, the art of existence unfolds. Ooh. Right. So it's like it takes space and matter in order for there to be anything at all. In fact, the concept of matter itself is only really conceptual. You can only really conceive of it with space being its antithesis, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, well, what is space? It's like the absence of matter. It's like, what is matter? Well, it's the stuff that's in space, right? So in the same way that this relationship is like 2 sticks propped up against each other, right? That ultimately create the teepee. without the other stick, there would be no form, is the same way that our consciousness meets time and creates the art that is the experience in between.
I like that.
I'm being art. I'm being art.
Here,
Yeah,
here's
and
another way to
ultimately,
put it.
sure.
Like think about this. Like you could obviously look at it in very different ways, but think about like a tree growing. This is like very abstract, but like a tree growing is art, and that happens over time. That happens over hundreds of years. And it's the same thing of whether you're drawing something. That drawing doesn't just happen instantaneously, but if you were to look back on it, you would have thought that it happened like that because it seemed like it just happened like that. And like the stars and galaxies forming, and like I just think of like all the stuff in nature, how it is art, and we're kind of like the microcosm of that, and we're creating our own art within like I I I start to think more and more that like Earth is kind of just like an art project.
Yeah, I love that perspective. And when you talk about the tree and you talk about a tree growing in and of itself almost has a narrative structure, right? Where there's a seedling. And how many metaphors have you heard about, a seedling, and then the water from the sky comes down and the seedling starts to grow, and then it's a young sapling and it has this experience and that experience that shapes its bark and shapes the way that it moves and grows towards the sky, and it seeks, right? There's so much metaphor in just a tree growing, but it's only allowed for by time passing. You can only have a narrative structure if there's a timeline in which it takes place over. Otherwise, it's just kind of, and I don't even know how to describe this. It's just like all there at once. Then there's no narrative structure to it. A tree is everything at once. And it's not just every stage of itself. It's every stage of everything that led up to that tree is then connected to. So time in a way is something that allows us to chunk down the isness of everything into pieces that we can bite off, chew, organize, arrange into a good story. And that's what, I think that's one of the biggest things that drives people. And I always try to avoid, when I make a point about something or make an analogy, I never mean to reduce it down to that one analogy or that one point. Like there's infinite hyperlinked cross-reference metaphors that are available inside any conversation like this. So time does a lot more than just allow us to chunk things down, and people like a lot more than just a good story, but one of the things that really drives us is meaning and being able to draw connections between things. And, you can even, and if I can go out on a different ledge here, maybe a little bit, you can even think about somebody who is a nihilist, right? Who doesn't believe that there's any meaning in anything whatsoever. There's no point to anything. And that person might respond to what I said, where, well, we like to find meaning. We like to connect dots. We like to draw narrative. We like to have purpose behind the purposefulness of things. Well, the nihilist would say, well, no, I don't. I absolutely don't. There's no point to any of it. It's all relative, right? But at the time, that's another type of story. That's another story. That's the kind of story that the nihilist enjoys. The nihilist enjoys the freestyle, the free for all, and enjoys. That's the one that they're working with at that point in time, at the very least. But everything has a story. Even the people that say that there is no story, well, that's their story. Everything, every experience, every way of conceptualizing anything is nestled within the narrative structure, the story, so to speak.
Yeah. And I think it's also, I think I'm right here that Nietzsche was like the guy who was like the big nihilist. And one of his things was like that God is dead, or like not believing in God. And that's something that I never used to believe in. And then I kind of realized that like, if you don't believe in God, that's still you believing in something. So for somebody to like kind of snark at somebody for believing in God, like, oh, you're believing in something that you can't see. Like, if you don't believe in God, another point, like you're believing in something, you're believing that there is no God, and that you kind of just like came up here, and like maybe you're believing that you are the God, which I feel like is a lot more egotistical than like, there's a higher power or a higher source. But it's the same thing, as that people just want to be able to tell stories, and everything that is, even in your drawing, there's a lot of just stories to be there's a lot of stories to be told just from like 4 simple symbols. That why did you draw them? Have you been thinking about these things a lot? How have these things kind of helped structure your life?
Yeah, well, oftentimes what many of us don't realize is that there's lots of different languages that the subconscious speaks, but our imagistic structures underlie our emotions, the way that we do things, the way that we act, the way that we believe on a day-to-day basis. It's just that they're lying below the surface. They're lying beneath the surface. And most people don't interact with them or don't know how to interact with them, or would even consider themselves to be cut off from the what to call it, the imagistic substructure that underlies our personal unconscious in addition to our collective unconscious. The symbol mapping process is one that allows you to directly access those themes and expand on them by having a long form conversation with me. What ultimately happens is you're sending an analog signal and I modulate that into images, right? It's the same way that you could get sent code and that's a JPEG, or you get sent sound waves and then you can turn that into music. The whole idea is that I'm a filtering process in our conversation. You start with the indefinable blur of images, sounds, emotions, feelings, senses, right? And you convert that into speech. And that's all built up over your experiences in your lifetime. You convert that into speech. That speech then gets sent to me via sound waves. I sit there and with my own ability to filter, process, meditate on the individual, I start to convert that back into images, but I'm willing to put it down on a piece of paper. And so I allow that it's more than an analog signal. It's rather complex. I allow the energy that you're sending as a result of the speech that you're creating from the underlying structure of your subconscious and your conscious mind. They're kind of intertwined. And then I modulate that onto a piece of paper so that you can see it. You know, I'm like, you're the earthquake and I'm the seismograph that's scribbling it down on the paper. So yeah, it's a really powerful and lighthearted way. You know, a lot of people, they'll get into active dreaming and they'll spend months dream journaling. People will try and draw themselves. They'll express themselves via drawing. People will meditate. Beautiful. Do I have mine next to me? I have a couple books that are filled with dreams now. Not that dream journaling isn't amazing, right? I love dream journaling. I journaled this morning. I had a wild dream. It's really fun to capture them and to be able to look back on the patterns that seem to emerge and arise. But the reason why I say that is because a lot of people don't have the desire, the know-how, the time, the discipline, the commitment to really try and contact and interact with the other inside them. And I like the inner child more than the subconscious, but different people have different ways that they conceptualize the other, right? To put it one way. And so the symbol mapping process is like, you don't do the work. You just blab. And through your blabbing, I actively listen and forms come down the piece of paper. One thing that I wanted to say, I'd love to talk about my process in alchemy all day long, but one thing, and maybe this isn't a point to jump off now or inside of this conversation, but no offense to the nihilists. I love nihilists. I love the perspective, right? This isn't putting down the nihilist perspective, but nihilists appropriate Nietzsche. They pick and choose what Nietzsche had to say and interpret it their own way, which is what we'll do with everything. But Nietzsche did not say God is dead for the sake of being a nihilist. I wouldn't classify Nietzsche as a nihilist. And I would also like to, in this same breath, mention that a lot of nihilists appropriate Buddhism, right? And you said nihilists say, well, I don't believe in God, I don't have beliefs. Well, then your belief is that you don't have beliefs. Buddhists and nihilists will use Buddhism as kind of like a tie-in to a wise or I don't know how to describe it, but an enlightened structure of conceptualizing the world. But in reality, it's not that Buddhists don't believe in God. It's just that they don't ever put God into any kind of a box whatsoever. They don't ever really try to attempt to define what God is. It's almost like, well, yeah, I'll leave it at that. But Nietzsche, I've got a couple files on Nietzsche and why he said God is dead. At very least, let me give you the part of the full quote. God is dead. We have killed him. What festivals of atonement shall we create to wash away the rivers of blood? Right.
Wow.
Which is a lot different. It's a lot different than God's dead, which is what a lot of people like to take away from his writing. But he was in short lamenting, you know, he was wondering, oh my goodness, we're entering the age of science. And so it's cutting out the religious substructure that is organized and provided for society, making it to this point that it has for so long. What's going to happen now, right? Because now we're just free falling. Now we're just floating. Now everything is relative. And oh my gosh, what are we going to do? That was more Nietzsche's perspective in a nutshell. Yeah. So
yeah, I'm glad you shared that, because that's obviously the only part of it that I knew. The full quote definitely put it into more perspective. And like, I honestly think that it's very fascinating. Like, I'm very fascinated with like religion in general, like studying other religions and like understanding that like every single religion, if you really look at them to their core, they talk about the same stuff. They use different names to define certain things. But I just think that it's so, I don't want to say funny, because it's not funny because people die over this stuff, but it's kind of ironic how people kill each other over their beliefs about religions, when all religions at their core are about loving people, which I feel like is the purpose of like why we're all here, to learn how to love each other, even though if we have differing opinions on things. And I just think it's so, yeah, I guess the term ironic is that these religions all came from love, and the messages kind of got maybe manipulated or just misinterpreted to the point where people use them as justification to hurt other people. And yeah, I just think that is, it's weird.
Well, a new word just came to mind: misinterpreted, malinterpreted. Right? Interpretation is part of our birthright. It's part of what makes being a human interesting. It's part of the whole free will bit. And make no like doubt about it, the universe is continuously generating more and more novelty over time. It's complexifying in an ever more interesting, at the very least, it's interesting, right? Everybody look at the world and say, what the hell is going on? This is crazy. But at the very least, we can agree objectively that it's interesting, right? We call that novelty. And at the same time, the mind seems to be getting larger and larger, which is, I would not say that it is the center of the generation of consciousness, but it is at least the center of our ability to articulate and parse apart what consciousness is. So it's not that existence and reality isn't for understanding. Understanding part of the joy. It's one of the joyful experiences that we get to take part in. We get to discover and uncover and learn more and interact with this matrix of life in an ever more deep kind of a way. But malinterpretation is when we use understanding or interpretation for the sake of controlling reality, right? And this happens at a microcosmic, as above, so below, right? This happens at an individual level, and it happens at a collective level. And at an individual level, we have people that, look, there's people that are enlightened out there that just use their enlightened construct and all of their tropes of non-attachment and I don't desire, and they use as a way to be one up on others. They use that as a way to kind of try and control their reality and control their position in reality based on the way that they see themselves. A lot of other ways that people malinterpret life and ultimately war against themselves as a result. Some people have experiences where a group doesn't like them or they don't fit in, right? And then the malinterpretation is what happens when the person finds themselves with no worth whatsoever. But on a macro scale, we see large groups of people, and maybe that's not malinterpretation. Maybe I'd say that at an individual level, it's misinterpretation that ultimately takes away from that person's joy and ability to be to their fullest potential. But on a macro level, there's malinterpretation, where we have groups of people that seek to control other groups of people based on stories that we've created out of existence that have formed over time. And instead of looking at them and seeing how we can reflect on the grand scheme of life and find the self-similarity between the stories that are written and the way that life actually seems to be, phenomenologically speaking, right? We have groups of people that use that and turn it into dogma. They interpret these pieces of art, which is what they are, right? Everything is art, especially our religious stories. They're unbelievable. They're unbelievable. I mean, the way that you can draw metaphor from, and I'm particularly, I wouldn't say well-versed, I'm much better versed in the stories than I am in any other, but the way that you can draw a metaphor, even for the evolutionary process, right, is just, it's so beautiful, it's deep, and these people were writing about things that they couldn't have possibly known. And it's this evidence of a collective substructure that flows out of us when we create imagery, when we create art. You see dragons, right? So let's take it out of a religious context. Dragons are a creature that is inherent to every single culture and corner of the earth that we possibly know of, right? And it's like, wow, that's really interesting. So maybe there's some connection between all of us, right? But why dragons? What is it with dragons, right? And if you think about the nature of a dragon, what is its structure, right? You've got a giant cat-like body. You've got the ability to breathe fire, sometimes in some cases water. You've got right? They talk, which is really interesting. Dragons talk. They hoard gold, right? There's these qualities to dragons that almost all of them have. And it's curious. It's like, well, it's just a story, right? Well, no, what if it wasn't just a story? What if there was significance? The fact that that's a story that's permeated every culture over time. What if the symbology of a dragon held some sort of meaning? What if those qualities that it had came from somewhere? That was tied into the ethereal and narrative-driven realms? And what if it was also tied into the biological realms, right? So when you think about human beings and you think about our major predators over time, one of them I forgot to mention was the snake, right? Reptiles, poisonous snakes. We've got predatory cats. It's the body of a dragon. Birds of prey. That's the wings of the dragon. Fire, which is one of the most destructive and unstoppable forces. In many cases, we see dragons that are water dragons, right? Or the Hydra, which is a whole other set of symbolism where you chop off one head and more grow. Sounds like the problems that we have in life, right? Fix one thing and more things pop up. But then we look at the armor, the fact that they can talk and hoard gold. So to try and tie this in, in short, dragons represent the unknown. Predators for us represented the unknown. Of course, there's things like pain and being eaten and death that are wrapped up into that. But at the end of the day, those things are only not desirable because they're unknown, right? And so dragons are the ultimate amalgam of the unknown, or the conglomeration of the unknown between predatory cats, predatory birds, snakes, and then the speaking part. It's like, well, but dragons speak. It's like, right. Have you ever found a more cunning predator than a human being? Have you ever found a deeper trickster than a human being? And not just a human being. What if that was the self? Right? Because today we know ourselves and our faults better than anyone. And we can undercut ourselves. We are sly and tricky beyond the capacity for anyone to do that to us. And then to make the story not so scary and reptilian, right? They hoard gold and they live in a cave. Okay, well, that could be loosely tied into the idea of going within, going into the depths, going where you don't necessarily want to go, where it's dark and it's a treacherous climb down, right? That's digging into oneself. There's a reason why we repress and suppress emotions. There's a reason why we stay surface, right? It's not a safe path necessarily, in the sense that it won't be without great challenge, right? But there's gold they hoard. Why do they hoard gold? Well, this ties into alchemy, right? Gold, to break it down quickly, it retains its value over time. Okay, that's symbolically, and it's valuable to everybody. Everybody wants gold. Everybody always wants gold, unless we're talking about the guy that was like, I'm good, I don't need gold, man. I just need breath and water and a couple grains of rice, right? So gold for knowledge. Knowledge is the thing that retains value, the greatest value over time. Knowledge is ultimately the thing that we seek. And what is more powerful than self-knowledge, right? So there's no one way to cut this up. This is one way of accessing the symbolic language that we are all familiar with, that lies underneath the surface of everybody. This isn't an alien art form, okay? Once you open someone up to the ability to read the symbology inside of a narrative, right? Or inside of even a visual piece of art, it's like some switch that was always there, just waiting to be got turned on, and it starts flowing from the person, and their connection to their inner self starts flowing. Anyway, I've been on a bit of a tangent here because some things have been connecting as I've been speaking, but Yeah, I just wanted to turn it back over because you're gracious enough to let me roll there.
No, that was awesome. I always just feel like I just learned so much talking to you and just like got a whole nother perspective on the whole dragon thing because I wasn't very well versed in that topic. And just hearing you talk about all that, it seems like it could be one thing, it could just be like a manifestation of like the deepest, darkest fears that everybody has in their subconscious because, you know, one person, everybody has their own subconscious, but I'm of the belief that everybody's subconsciouses are connected in a way kind of like the internet. Like everybody can be connected with each other over the internet. I think the same thing is possible with our minds. Like you could legitimately like be in somebody else's mind and understand what they think. And we have a lot of common like fears, a lot of common loves, a lot of common everything. And the thing with gold, like I usually interpret the gold as being of like love and like peace, but that's the same thing with knowledge because like those things are all pretty intertwined with each other. You know, knowledge of the universe leads to love because and in that same token, fear would be ignorance and being kind of fearful of something that you can't see, but it's also like inside your mind. So it could be that the only thing that we have to fear is literally ourselves. And like you said best, like you're talking, you're a trickster, all this stuff. And that also kind of alludes to the whole like Garden of Eden, like the talking snake, like that kind of popped into my mind when you were talking. And it's just like awesome to hear. I also am kind of the belief that like dragons are real, but like real is in the sense that like there are like infinite dimensions and like anything is possible. And like I actually saw a dragon in a dream once and like that rattled me. And then I was like, wow, like why am I so closed-minded about things? And that's what it really I definitely want to start talking about dreams now because I showed you the dream journal. I started this last week and I haven't gotten much. I haven't gotten much, but I had one little nugget like that I wrote from a dream last night that it was like I saw like this perfect like house, like a design for like a perfect house for me. And it was basically just like a big piece of land and then just like a circle in the middle, like a white circle, and then it just like went underground. And then my I was talking to my dad about it and he was like, "Yeah, you should look up like the Apple headquarters." And literally like what I saw in my dream was like very close to like the Apple headquarters. And I had never seen that building like once in my life. And all of a sudden like this thing showed up in my dream and like I was like designing like a house or something. Like I never been interested in designing a house. I just want to hear like some of your perspective on like you said you had like a crazy dream last night. Just what do you think about that?
Well, it's funny that, dragons come up. Well, what do I think about my dream, your dream? Well, talking about connectivity, right? Correlation isn't causation, but I had a dream about a dragon actually last night. Funny enough, I feel like I'm gaining insight on as I sit here because distilling narrative and distilling story like dreams and images, it doesn't always come all at once. It kind of happens as the day progresses. Sometimes you look back on something you wrote a year or two ago, and then you start to understand the significance and how that ties in. And it's almost like, did I really write that then? Wow, that's so applicable now. As far as dragons go, I had this dragon that was with me, and it was following me around, and I was seeking to find my quirk or my power. It's actually taken from a show called My Hero Academia, which is like a magical. It's a show where everybody evolves to a certain point. Everybody has all these different quirks. Some people can grow super hard. Some people can shoot acid out of their hands. Like there's all these different superpowers. And I had this dragon that would follow me around. And my goal was to find my quirk. And at one point, I found myself at the top of this mountain, and it was time for me to fight this dragon for whatever reason. And it was like, it had like a silver underbelly, and the dragon was red with like blue accents and some gold feathers on it. And it was huge. I mean, when I tell you huge, like this was, I don't even know how to show you, like I was the dragon was, as big as this piece of paper here, and I was the little red dot that I just put in the center. Like the dragon got enormous when I went to the top of the fight it. And it was interesting because it threw me up in the air, it swatted me, and it kept swatting me. It was almost juggling me. And I didn't even have an opportunity to like punch it, let alone what would happen if I did try to punch it. The thing is huge. And I remember seeing myself getting tossed around from the third person. And I heard almost like there was an announcer in the dream. It was like, Yeah. Uh, what did he say? Yeah, looks like half of the bones in his body are broken. I was like, what? That's weird. So bones, funny enough, I don't want to go down another tangent, but I did a little active imagination session today, a la Jung, or a la the people that Jung studied, because active imagination sessions are something that go much further back than Jung. And the part of the guided meditation was going out into this field, seeing the structure. Think about the dream you just had. And then what we did is we took a torch, we lit the structure, we watched it burn to the ground, and then we looked at what was in ashes, and I found a bone. So, little side note, don't know if it's relevant, but oftentimes, like, in the same way that you can read serial time to pull out different patterns, is the same way that across multiple mediums of interacting with life, you can start to pick out patterns, and it's all generated by you and your interaction with the life matrix. So kind of getting insight to the subconscious is a very multifaceted approach, and you use free association, and you take patterns from one domain and apply them to another. So that was the dream that I had. I thought that's what you were asking me. Am I correct? You were asking me about my dream, or were you asking me to reflect on your dream?
No, definitely your dream, because I know one thing is that like I think dreams are very specific to like what you're going through, and like nobody is able better to interpret it than you. So like just you talking it out on camera, like I know that I'm going to talk about this in a second, but I want to ask you, when you were getting like tossed around by the dragon, do you remember feeling like actual physical pain, or does it not really like did it not really register with you?
It wasn't so much like pain, but it was disorienting. Like when you ever get hit by a large wave at the beach and you get tumbled around under the water in the surf. That's what it felt like. So I feel the pain. There's very few dreams that I've felt physical pain in before, although it has happened.
Yeah. Because like I asked that because I'm gonna share like another one that I had. And, like this is like my most viewed YouTube video. I don't know if you saw it, but it was like the falling elevator dream, like my interpretation. And I had this dream like twice within like maybe like a 2 week period, like July of last year. And it was so crazy that like I would be going up in an elevator to like maybe I was in like a hotel or like a mall or something and went like 20 stories. And there were always other people in the elevator. And then all of a sudden, like we get to our floor and it doesn't stop and it just goes down and crashes. And like we never like died in the dream, but like I just remember being feeling like so much pain, like concussion, like everybody gets out and like everybody's like crying and like there's like a ton of people there and they're like, what just happened to you guys? And like I always remember being with other people, but then I remember waking up and literally feeling like I had a concussion. And I was like, what the like what happened there? So just like me talking about it on camera for like 8 minutes really helped me like reflect on like going through different fears. And like I felt like because at that point I had started getting into a lot of like Paul Selig's work and like really like raising my vibration. And I feel like the elevator metaphor of like raising your vibration, like going up, and I was afraid of like falling back down and crashing down with like the fear and all that. But it's also very interesting to me is how that's been my most viewed YouTube video because other people are having such a similar dream, and that must be like a very common metaphor, like the falling elevator thing. Like have you ever had like something like that happen?
So I've never had the falling elevator dream, but to your point about us being connected underneath the surface, I like to think that our minds are connected to almost like we're a bunch of fruiting bodies, humans on this planet, and there's a unconscious substructure that's the mycelial network. That's the real mushroom, right? The fruiting bodies are just the things that are emergent properties that hold lots of nutrients and create experiences for other larger creatures that eat them sometimes. Healing experiences like shiitake mushrooms, turkey tail mushrooms heal cancer. There's other types of mushrooms that are out there, obviously, that provide experiences. But we are in some ways like fruiting bodies, and it doesn't surprise me that you've had dreams like that, because as you dig into the world of dreamation, which is something that is anybody can do it. People look at others, are like, oh, they can interpret dreams. No, everybody can interpret dreams. It's a matter of exercising that muscle, first of all. But you'll see that there's lots of themes There's things that are relevant to the personal unconscious, right? So there's symbols that are referential to purely you. They're personal to you. They're developed as a result of your experience. But then there's things like elevators that are maybe a little bit less personal and a little bit more objective. And one of the ways that you can use to start to interpret dreams yourself, and I won't necessarily apply this to your dream, because I'm more interested in you running me through the whole dream and how it happened, and I'd only offer you thoughts on it if that was something that you asked for, because everybody is their own best determinator, person who can determine what it was that was the message for them. But the way that I would think about an elevator, if I was looking to interpret a dream, is what is the objective nature of an elevator, right? Okay, confined space that takes you up and down. It's like, all right, how could we think about that if that was a part of a poem, right? You know how poets write in metaphor and in simile. That's how dream interpretation works, right? So it's like, okay, what might that mean? Confined space that takes us up and down, that is suspended, right? But then it falls. It's not supposed to fall. It's not a place that we would expect to fall in, but it did fall, and there was other people in there. So what can it mean that there was other people in confined up and down space? That's a beginning to how I would go about, and some others would go about down, reading it like a poem, and one metaphor that I just wanted to throw in that I think is really useful for whoever's listening that's interested in beginning to understand language of the unconscious, right? Or the other, or the inner child, or the self, is that if you've ever seen the movie the movie Transformers, right? Bumblebee doesn't have a real voice. At least he doesn't have a voice like we're used to. He can communicate with the other Transformers, but when it comes to communicating with humans, Bumblebee has to speak in radio. He speaks in broken radio snippets. He'll throw in songs, advertisements, whatever he can to try and get his point across, at a given moment. And the interesting thing about that is really similar to how the subconscious speaks. And take one of broken radio snippets and apply it to whatever you want. Apply it to symbols, images, feelings, songs that come to mind, thoughts that pop up seemingly inopportune moments, right? And the whole idea is to kind of decode what the message is that's coming through in a piecemeal and broken. We don't necessarily, it's not that we can't speak it, it's that just we don't speak it all that often. We live in a world where we pay attention to paragraphs, but we're told where to go and what to do by symbols on signs. It's really interesting how consciously we pay attention to words, right? But at a subconscious level, the more immediate communication that takes place when we're on the highway, when we're driving down the street, when we're navigating our smartphones, right? Do you actually, obviously you look at the button itself and what it says on an app, but it's more about where the button's located that has you going and, well, the menu's probably over here. But why is a menu over there? What makes that space on the screen the menu space, right? And we have this collective. Now you could say that that's just the way that it happened over time, and that's fine, but there is some sort of organization to it. There is some sort of logic to it. Anyway, that's another tendril of conversation. The point is that we run off of images, but we pay attention to direct, precise, articulate words. And that's not a problem. It's part of our long form story that we're all co-creating and co-writing together. But images and other forms of art-laden medium are the language of the deeper parts of ourselves. And I don't know where I was that got me to here. We're talking about your dream with the elevator, and I got a little excited there in finding some words to explain how to interact with the other. But maybe you know where we were.
It's definitely just like talking about dreams, because like this is something that like really fascinates me, and like I know it fascinates a ton of people, because like there's nobody who is like right about this. Like people can have like theories about it. Like I know like one of the stories in like the Old Testament was like Joseph was like the dream interpreter, and like he interpreted like the Pharaoh's dream about how there was going to be like a famine and things like that, where you could have said like, how did this guy know it? Was this guy like gifted? But at another level, like, because I've never really had many lucid dreams. I remember having like one like within the last year, which like radically like changed the way I think about things. But another interesting thought I have to share with you, I want to hear what you think about this, is that so when we're like awake in the dream world, that means like we're sleeping in our bed at night. So when we're awake in this world, does that mean that we're sleeping in that other world?
I would say that other, I don't look at it as two separate spaces that one consciousness goes. I look at it all as one cohesive whole. And it's not that our subconscious is asleep, it's that our perceptual space, this experience box that we're in, seems to be present with the list that's going on outside of us. Whereas when we're sleeping, we allow ourselves to slip into much more the space of the unconscious. But I wouldn't say that it's necessarily two separate worlds and one of them turns off. Like you have your subconscious is constant. It's like a processing center that's constantly aware of or conscious of or interacting with the conscious mind. So I mean, perception. So here's what's turned off: our awareness of, our attention to what's going on inside. That's what's turned off when we're awake, right? And when we're asleep, we don't have much of an option. So not everybody dreams. I mean, I didn't dream for 5 years. It's not like every single person has the same experience of going to sleep, because I think that space is it's got a lot of different, I don't want to call them purposes, but functions. Like there's a lot of different things that happen in that sleep space. But based on the way that you framed it, I don't think that one turns off necessarily. It's that we turn away. We turn away from a particular part of ourselves that's always running, that's always there. That is the primary structure from which the experience of consciousness is birthed forth from.
I like that. I like that a lot. That definitely, yeah, because it's kind of like the dream world kind of surrounds us and it kind of like infuses us with life, maybe. And it's also like another thing that, like, if all these like other dimensions exist, like they're not like somewhere else, like they're all right here. Like I had this thought today. I actually had this thought that I was going to ask you. I was like, do you ever just like feel like you're being watched? And it's not like by the government or like by other people. Like, do you ever have the feeling that you're being watched by like people or like creatures or whatever you want to call them from other dimensions? That like, say I'm looking at this computer screen right now, there could be infinite of them right here, like looking at me and like watching our conversation. The same way like we watch TV for entertainment. These people know how to tune into other dimensions and watch other people just do silly stuff because like that's what people find entertaining. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not willing to say that anything is not going on. I can't say that I've had that experience. Maybe when you talk about it like that, I've had maybe an awareness or a sense of, for the sake of being scientific, a sense of awareness of being watched or viewed from somewhere else by a bunch of other things. But as far as the possibility of it, I mean, the universe is infinite, right? So therefore, within the universe, which is infinite, right, or whatever is outside of the universe is infinite, even if it's other universes. But we don't have to go to the multiverse theory where there's infinite universes. We can be with one universe, because if the universe is infinite, then all possibilities would also be contained inside of it. So, I have no problem, and I only say that to build some sort of a tangible case for the idea that it's very, very, very possible. I mean, I think that all possible possibilities are. We just don't experience them all. And I don't think that all of them are necessarily practical for experiencing either. And I think the practicality of each dimension in reference to our ability to experience is also relative to the body that we grow out of or that we grow into. Perceptions and our people talk about the body and not identifying with it, but at the same time, there's so much of our actual consciousness and the structure of it that is informed by having a body. Our desires, our hopes, our goals, our dreams it is very much grounded in our biological evolution. So anyway, I'm getting on a little bit of a tangent here, but I've only had that sensation maybe once or twice.
Yeah,
Maybe
like
once or twice.
the reason I bring that up is like I haven't personally had that, but like I've heard and like watched people, like people talk about like angels watching over them and like things like that. And like I don't feel like these people are making these things up. Like I feel like they actually do think that like angels are like watching over them. And it might not be like a separate consciousness. It could be like a former relative or like an ancestor or somebody that they had a close connection with, that person just wants to like watch them and like feel that they're good. And I don't know if that's true or not, but I know that just I'm a lot more open-minded to this stuff than I used to be. And I think that this stuff is very intertwined with like the dream world and stuff. Because like say you see like a relative or like somebody who's dead in your dream, like, well, is that just your imagination? Or I actually wrote a poem about this a while ago, but it's like are dreams real or are they fake? Well, does it really matter? And to me, like I don't think it really matters, because who are you to decide what is real and what is fake? Like you experienced it in the present moment when you were dreaming, and now you think about it and you forget about it. Well, what's the difference between like when you were 11 years old? You can't remember anything when you're 11 years old. Did it still not happen? Was it still not real because of that? Because it was another space and time. And yeah, that's all I got to say about that. But let's let's move
That's
let's move to
that's
another
oh,
topic of
sorry.
conversation. I just want to know, like, go deeper into like you, like, so like my inspiration, like why I do what I do is because like when I was a freshman in college, like I went through mental health issues like depression and anxiety, and like I realized like nobody's talking about this stuff. Like there's such a large stigma, and nobody's teaching about mental health and emotional intelligence and self-love and like elementary school, middle school, high school, college. And I know that it should be taught because people need to learn this stuff. School doesn't prepare you enough for these social skills that people aren't going to learn on their own. So what was your like inspiration or motivation for starting Alchemy, for getting into the whole drawing and stuff?
Personal motivation. Well, I spent a number of years battling with a sense of purposelessness and hopelessness, and tragedy. Like, so a tragedy from a technical standpoint, is a story that ends sad, right? A comedy is from a very, objective standpoint, it's a story that ends happy. And I dealt with lots and lots and lots of thoughts that in one way or the other, I realized over time, because there were some stories that I held on to for a while that really pressured me and weighed me down. I mean, big time, like for years, like I was dragging myself through life, and people wouldn't know it on the outside because I do a pretty good job of putting on a good front, a good facade. But for a long time, I was completely inundated with the notion that I and everybody else was living out a tragedy, to an extreme point. And I'm happy to be very vulnerable and honest. I had some suspicions or concerns that we might already be living in hell. This already might be hell. And the experience that we're having right now is really just a sham. So that at the end of our life, at the end of all this, what happens is the curtain gets pulled, the demons crowd around, they look at you and say, ha ha, we got you again. All that striving was for nothing. And you're going, before you can even object, you're right out of birth canal again. You're crying like a baby, right? And what I came to realize was that was one story that I had not concluded on, but had intimated or felt based on a number of different experiences that I had tied together. And there's also the fact that you can't really know at the end of the day. There's nothing that you can really know for certain at the end of the day. This is, people talk about the likelihood of this being a simulation. It's more likely than it is than it isn't. Look, it's likely that it is. It's likely that it isn't. Those are just concepts that we place on top of things to try and define it. Those are stories that we put on top of things to try and define it. At the end of the day, we don't really know what this is. And so what I've come to find is that it's a manner of orientation to what this is that ultimately shapes what it is. And if you are suspicious of it, if you are oriented to life in such a way that has you filled with misgivings and suspicion, and you're at odds with life, you find it to be odd, and not in a good way, not in a novel way, but in a, this doesn't seem to work, this doesn't compute kind of a way. what inevitably ends up happening is that there's an infinite amount of stories that you can write as far as why it is. Hell is just a word that is put on top of an idea that means bad, not good, right? I could write so many different stories about how not good or how it'll end up bad. At the end of the day, the similar pattern between those stories is that it's not good. It's not good. And it's don't to throw away my own difficulties and events that took place in my life that gave me good reason to question life, right? It's not like we don't have good reason in life. That's one thing that I feel like is really important to connect to, is that people say, don't question life, don't worry about it. That's not meditative. We shouldn't let these stories take hold. Hold on a second. We have great reason to, okay? There is a million, matter of fact, reason I think caters to questioning life. If you try to take reason to a certain point, it caters to questioning life. It is much easier to make a logical critique of this life matrix and say that it's ultimately bad than it is to say that it's good. It's much, much easier. It's way easier. And as it, we have a tendency to slip into the state of being, or the state of orientation to being and existence, that deems it as bad. And I don't critique anybody for that. I don't say, well, you shouldn't do that, because like, I get it. I've done it a million different ways, a million different times. And I went really personal. It's hard for me to tell my entire inside of even an hour, right? Or 2 hours or 3 hours, as far as why I might have concluded that, how my thoughts changed over time. And instead of worrying about whether this was hell or not, I worried about it turning out tragically in one way or the other, my life and the life of everybody else around us. But, what happening is over the past few years, I had a couple experiences. I picked up a couple practices that helped me clear some space, get some clarity on things. I've always been a student of psychology and psychoanalysis. It's deeply interesting to me. In addition to, I was trying to figure out trying to figure out something. I didn't even know what it was that I wanted to figure out. If I knew what my problem was, well, hey, I would have fixed it. I would have made things a little bit better. And so I'm trying to find my way back to alchemy here. My desire to help people, that doesn't come from my personal strife. That's something that's been innate within me ever since I was little boy. And I'm almost tempted. I just recently got a progress report from a teacher from 21 years ago, from one of my teachers. And she talked about my nature and my personality when I was a little kid, but maybe that would be a little bit, I don't know. The point is I've always had this in me, and it's been recognized by me and by other people in my life. And I don't take credit for that, right? I'm blessed to have had the genetics and the nurture and the nature that led me to be who I was. So my desire to help did not come from the belt. But after going through this number of years where life felt empty and life felt dead and life felt hard and made me anxious and made me depressed, once I started to figure things out and gain some insight, right? Figure things out. That's funny because it's a constant figuring of things out. It's a constant, well, to use the dragon metaphor, you're fighting this giant monstrous dragon that you have no hope of conquering. Okay. It hits you and you fly up into the air. And for a moment, you're like, oh, maybe I'm getting my bearings. I'm able to see things. Things are kind of clear. And then as you fall back down, wham, you get smacked again by the dragon. Back up into the air. It's this up and down undulation. So when I say figure things out, I say that and laugh at the same time. But figure things out to a point where I could speak about it, right? Where I realized I was writing stories that ended in tragedy, and that was taking the life out of my life. Every single day, every single moment, it had me resort to things that didn't necessarily serve me, outlets for my pain and places to try and hide from the existential dread that I felt every moment, that don't ultimately get me to where I want to be, that don't cater to a good life for me and as a result the people around me. So all the more anybody that's experiencing if they have the capacity to look outside themselves simultaneously, which not everybody does. And that's not a judgment. It's not a some people are here and some people are here. That's some people have the capacity to and some people don't. We're all on a learning journey at our own pace. All right. Sometimes that frustrates me to all get out. I want to wring the neck of a particular person who might not be thinking about anybody but themselves. Right. And I say that honestly because I'm not here to be super hygienic and hide from the fact that I have these emotions, right? Being enlightened or being able to fly above the not mean that you don't experience the emotional pulls of the fray. It doesn't mean that you don't have the thoughts that aren't necessarily good. It means that you are the hero that confronts these thoughts, that sees these thoughts, sees them for what they are and deals with them appropriately, and transmutes this energy into something that's better for themselves and as a result better for others, right? So anyway, led to the notion of alchemy, it's a non-linear process. The notion of alchemy came to me, really it became real for me in this year. And alchemy at its core, a lot of people like to talk about the lore of the Philosopher's Stone and all the the occult practices and the esoteric nature of alchemy. And it's all very, very, very interesting. But I think it's important to remember that at its core, alchemy is the transformation of the self. We are, in a sense, the Philosopher's Stone. We are the thing that grants everlasting life. And what is everlasting life? Oh, yeah. Paul Selig touched on this. Everlasting life happens moment to moment to moment to moment to moment. Everlasting life is not something that's off in the future. Everlasting life is a metaphor for the kind of state of being that we can access in this moment, that allows us to heal ourselves, that allows us to create something out of seemingly nothing, right? All attributes that the Philosopher's Stone has, it's really what you have the capability to do in any moment. And it's not always easy to access. It's really, really difficult. And I really encourage anybody that thinks that way, and I speak from my own experience, if you can't seem to figure out how to access the Philosopher's Stone in a given moment, don't turn that into a reason why you give up on yourself or give up on the Philosopher's Stone. Sometimes we are meant to be going through pain and meant to, that is, that's laden with a lot, the whole meant to, but there's an opportunity for learning in everything, and every experience can bring us to better experiences if we transmute them, which is the process of alchemy. Whether you have a Philosopher's Stone or not, transmutation is the process of alchemy where you're combining elements to create new elements. And in a sense, that's the story of evolution. Like organisms, fungi, bacteria, plants, fish, then all of a sudden we made it to humans, right? It's alchemy. It's the process of that game, Little Alchemy on the phone. That's what life is doing all the time. And so far we've gotten to human. And I'm not trying to be, what's the word? I forget what the word is. I'm not seeking to necessarily get out of the human form, or I'm not trying to be somebody that's seeking to become an or fuse with robots. Personally, I don't like that idea very much. I don't want to fuse with robots. That might be my ego. That might be, the biology within me anyway, the point being is that alchemy is taking place over time, and it's simply the combination of elements. And then you get to decide what the end result is by your appropriate combination of elements, or the ways that you put them together, the ways that you mix them together, and the story that comes out of them. Yeah, I'm not answering your question. Why do I want to help people? It's kind of, it's a question that, I could probably spend a long time on. How did I come to wanting to help people with alchemy? That started in my sales training class, where I realized that a simple game called the symbolism game produced results that were terrifying for me to deal with as the curator of the experience. We were supposed to be running a little breaker in the morning, and I had a room full of 12 people in my first sales training class that are crying. Lock the door, hope my manager doesn't come in. What are you doing to these people? Consoling each other. And so I realized, and not that I didn't always intimate the power of symbolism, definitely not to that depth, but I always had a connection to imagistic narrative and the power of symbols. That's why I ran that exercise in the first place. But after that experience, some time went on. And I found that my icebreakers and the deeper concepts that I would tie my sales training into was really the thing that was exciting and valuable to focus on, which was the perspective, the self-similar perspective, like what I found to be the best sales process, which in short is not focusing on the sale and really seeking to ultimately seek objective truth. What would be best customer? How do you deliver it to them? And how do you gain their trust in a way that they'll listen to you and actually make the best choice for themselves? There's a lot of concepts. I just realized, man, I don't want to focus on the sales training and have, the life lessons be the background. I want to focus on lives. I want to focus on people, perspective they care about, what hurts, what doesn't hurt, what makes them feel strong. And so I found myself, I was initially gonna run some self-development trainings over Zoom, virtual trainings online. And then I found a coaching program, and the coaching process was absolutely magical. Like, as somebody who's got experience with the psychoanalytic and the psychotherapeutic process, coaching was like hyperspeed, goal-oriented psychotherapy that just like breaking down walls as fast as they came. And it was predicated on the individual and asking them open-ended and empowering questions. So once I touched that magic, I realized that I was going to create some alchemy and fuse a few things together to create a unique, tangible, non-tangible, all inclusive. It's an inclusive resort of self-discovery that I wanted to create for people. And the past 6 months have really been trying to work out this process and even understand what it is that I'm doing. Like, I've been learning immense. I've been learning so much as I've continued to do this, because when I first started, I was like, draw a few symbols, we'll talk just to get an idea who the person was. But then I felt pulled, like a whim told me to, instead of just taking notes, graphically notate what the person was talking. And then that turned into this huge self-organized, which, I mean, it goes beyond, and it's still, you hear me starting to stammer because it confounds me the way that the forms seem to take shape. It's as if there is something else or someone else that is organizing it. Takes as the willingness of, I mean, not necessarily two individuals, but one person who's willing to talk, the other who's willing to listen and let their hand go and let their hand fly free. And I'm just beginning to discover what this process really holds for people. And well, yeah, man, I keep trying to answer your question. It's not going to work. So
No, that's awesome. There's just so much to unpack in what you just said. And like, I definitely look forward to like when you finally, get out of your shell and start posting some of your drawings on social media, because I know you're going to get like a following, because like, it's just like superb. That's the only way I could describe it. Like, it's kind of like out of this world type stuff. And like, I think one thing that you said that really resonated with me, that like you thought like what we're living right now is like hell. And like, I've had the same like thoughts, like the same. If you've ever heard the group Flatbush Zombies, hip hop group, they actually had an album, Vacation in Hell, and like that one as well. I was thinking like, oh, like that's kind of like a very good metaphor for what we're doing here. Like, we're vacationing in hell. Like, we're going down to like a lower vibration to experience what this is all like, experience all of this low vibrational stuff. And you'll always hear me talk about the law of one, but the law of one, what they say in that is that like here, like we're in like the third density, like we're third density beings. One of the things that isn't in any other place is that we have a veil. It's like a veil that's blocking us from what life actually is. And when you go to like fourth density, you kind of, so basically it's like the veil of separation, that you think you're separate from everybody and everything else. And really all suffering comes from that one thing, which is that you think you're separate from everybody else. Because when you're depressed, when you're lonely, you think that you're all alone. You think that it's only you and just you. And then once you get into the fourth density, which is of love, like the heart center, the veil's gone and you see that everybody and everything is connected and it's all love and it's all everything. And once I got to that like realization, which took me years because I was like the most negative and pessimistic person ever. And then that led to my mental health issues. And it got to a point where I finally realized, I was like, how is this helping me? how is me just being so negative and pessimistic helping me? It's not, because it's making me miserable. So I was like, all right, what if I just try to be more optimistic and positive? And I obviously had to fake it at first, because every time I would do it, my mind would just be like, this is stupid. Like, you're just like making all this stuff up. And over time, just through like meditating and like calming down my mind, I've started to realize that pretty much all the voices in your head are wrong. And like, it's not even saying, like, they're all just like ideas and imaginations. And like, your intuition is the only thing that's going to tell you the truth. And that's not really like a voice. That's just like a feeling. That's just like an innate knowing of what's right. And anything else is really just fear based. And I think the thing that is great about your business as well as mine, kind of like how they're intertwined, is that they're focused on like people finding their inner well of love that's within them, like not looking for anything without you. You're finding it all within you. You don't need to buy like a shirt or a product or anything else. It's about you doing the work and you basically realizing that you have the entire universe inside you. And I'm definitely just excited to see like where alchemy goes.
Well, I got to be honest with you, accessing that love, I like to think of it in the format of the inner child, right? Where over time, through a series of experiences, external and internal, right? Experiences outside of us that create the machinations and imaginations of our mind. They ultimately repress, they beat down the child inside of us, right? And the child being a metaphor for curiosity and play and love, but the child also being a way to describe the other that is inside of us that we interact with through art, through expression, through the thoughts that happen to come to our mind, through things like inner dialogue, actually asking yourself questions, which is a really, really great way to gain some insights if you actually ask open-ended questions. But accessing that love, what happens is that the child gets turned off as a result of the world that it grows out of, right? Over time. At the same time, the world that it grows out of is also what allows it to travel back to it, find itself. There is no real separation. Like, I'm not damning the world and its experiences, but the process seems to be that we are unconscious to a certain extent, and then we start to become conscious. And as we become conscious, we start worrying about the future. We start falling into line. We start shaping up. We start doing things a different way. We have pains that create constructs in our mind that we then reinforce when we allow those constructs to remain there. What happens is the child doesn't trust you anymore after a while. The child loses its trust, which ultimately, what's really important to remember about accessing this love, right? And it doesn't have to be such an arduous or masochistic process. I'm not saying that you have to beat yourself up or nose to the grindstone to connect to this love. But one thing that I found about connecting to love and connecting to the beautiful part of this is that that side of you is like burned. It's singed. It's like a wild animal that's been beaten and put into a cage. And you have to earn the thing's trust back. You have to be willing to make the first move. You have to reach out. And then your subconscious, yourself, your inner child, the universe, that's when it reaches back. But that's the beauty of free will. That's the beauty and the damn frustrating about free will is that it's never going to happen as a result of external events that come to pass over you. It's always going to happen as a result of your willingness to create space for that child. It's like your tough and difficult experiences and pains. It's like a bunch of judgmental family members that, that tells you that your kid's got his clouds and that he's no good and he's snot-nosed and all he does is think about imaginations. They're always asking the kid, what are you going to be when you grow up? What are you going to be when you grow up? And the kid just like finally shuts down, and then you yell at him because he spoke up at the dinner table because your relatives are mean and you allow your relatives to let you or to tell you how to parent your child that you're being mean to the geez Louise, I'm not drawing this metaphor as well as I'd like to, but the idea is that child inside of us, it loses its faith that we as a parent are going to protect its spirit of curiosity, its spirit of play. And so over time, that child realizes, well, if I speak out of turn, I'll get smacked. If I don't do something for the sake of, holding my weight in the household, I will get yelled at. I'll get told that I'm worthless, right? And we have this relationship with ourselves. Not everybody, but we tend to find that this relationship emerges between the self and the inner child as a result of the experience that take place over life. So anyway, I've said this a few times. The point is that it takes effort on the individual's part, right? You got to reach out. You get out to love. You get to reach out to love first. It won't just come to you. And for some people, it's like, well, that I've tried before. I've turned my nose. I've tried to have faith before. I've tried to do things that would lead to something better. I've tried to do the right thing despite being under so much pain. What would make the difference now? And it's that, well, it's not that. It's a continual process, us getting to love, getting to the place of love, being able to experience that. It's like Sisyphus rolling a boulder up a hill. Like, we are constantly engaged in that process, and we have to constantly roll this boulder up the hill because, well, life happens. And then you have to move even in greater circumstances, right? This is the Hydra. You chop one head off and a bunch more heads grow. And you chop one head off and a bunch more heads grow. Like, these are the problems that it presents. But the thing that allows you to overcome that is a continual holding on to your willingness to connect with love. But it's your willingness. Yeah. It's willingness of life to present you with events that will make you happy. It's your willingness to meet those events and realize that you're blessed to even operate in a reality, in a simulation, in a matrix, however you want to think about it, that works. It works. I can pick this up. I can move this over here. Awesome. We could have a reality where you try to move your right arm and you smack yourself in the head with your left foot. Like, really, that sounds kind of goofy, but we take for granted the simple nature that reality is organized in such a way that we can actually navigate it. And you might say that some people can only navigate it so far because they're laden with various types of conditions and pains that makes it hard for them to get out of the bed in the morning. But we can navigate this reality to an extent, period. There's some sort of structure to it. And so this kind of ties into what you were saying before, where everything is possible. I do think that everything is possible. I don't think that every possible organization of reality is necessarily one that we'd want to participate in, because some of it wouldn't make sense. Yeah. And it's not that all of life has to make sense, but hey, at least you scratch your head, maybe. And if you can't scratch your head, maybe you can, well, this is dangerous territory because I'm trying to, provide, to be grateful for life, for people that are even, unable to scratch their heads. And that's not really my place to do that, but we can all access that space if we're willing to reach out, if we're willing to find blessing. And then that child, over time, over putting in some work, over regaining its trust, right? Relationships get mended over time. You have to continuously show that child that you're there for it before it really starts to trust you again and starts to, well, anyway, we're off. I'm off in a bit of a tangent here.
Yeah, I liked one of the images that you said was of the guy who's continuously like rolling the boulder up the mountain. And like one of the things that I've seen like throughout my poetry and throughout my books, especially my first book, is that I compare life to like a mountain. Like I call it like Mount Dream. Like you're climbing up the mountain to get to the peak. But the thing is that the mountain is never ending. Once you reach one peak, there's always going to be more peaks to go to. And pretty much the thing is, that's pretty funny. But so it's basically, actually also made a video about this today, that we carry these boulders around in our mind, these boulders of fear. So is it going to be easier to climb the mountain when you're carrying boulders up with you? And why couldn't you just let them go? Well, the funny thing is you can just let go of the fear. You can just drop these boulders, but people cling to them because they get a sense of identity out of this. And that was totally me. I used to get a sense of identity from, oh, I suck. Oh, I'm scared of everything. I'm too shy. I'm too afraid to speak up. Oh, everything is against me. And that was making my climb a lot harder. And now my climb is a lot easier. Not to say that it wasn't a hard experience of dropping my boulders of fear that I was clinging to, but I also know that I made it way harder than it had to be, because it honestly is as easy. It's easy when you know that all you have to do is drop the fear, but it's hard because you can't just, like what I did for the first 20 years of my life was I avoided the negative emotions. And it's easy as in all you have to do is face the negative emotions with love. But the hard part is you actually have to face them, and it's painful, and you have to understand that it's painful. But on the other side of that pain is just like an expansion of love that's beyond anything that I could have ever imagined. Not anything that I could really ever describe. Like words don't do it justice. Like all I can say is like when I meditate, like in the morning now, like I meditate for like 20 minutes, like at the end, like I'll be like crying tears of joy. And like I never used to like cry. Like I was taught like guys aren't supposed to cry. Like that's weakness. And another thing that I appreciate you said earlier, like you were being like vulnerable. I made a podcast about that today. Like vulnerability is strength. We're taught in our society that being vulnerable shows weakness. And maybe that's how it was 2000 years ago when everybody was savage. And if you showed a little weakness, somebody would come and raid your village. But we're a little more evolved now. And, you know, the kind of like the pillaging. I actually watched this video. This is a completely different tangent, but like the current business system is basically like a more advanced system of like pillaging. Like the way that like society used to work was that instead of working for your own business, it would be a lot easier to just go to a successful society and just like chop their heads off and take all their stuff. And that's basically just evolved so we can all like live a little more harmoniously. But then again, that still exists because you see like us going into wars that we don't need to be in, and we go and take their oil and take their resources, and a bunch of sane people are like, well, isn't that not right? But that's kind of just like the savagery that we've evolved from. All we've done is just made more advanced weapons and higher technology. But I think that, and this is the kind of the next topic I want to get into. I think that we've kind of devolved, like we've evolved technologically, but I think we've like devolved spiritually and become a lot less in tune with our environments than we used to be. What do you think about that?
Well, I like the idea. I like bringing awareness to the notion that we have become less in with our environments and we become a little bit less in tune spiritually in some ways. I don't like the word devolved. The reason I don't like the word devolved is because I hold a perspective. I have a construct, right? Maybe we go extinct tomorrow. Maybe we're devolving rapidly. Humans, anyway, not the planet. The planet will still be. But I like to think that we are on a long-term growth trajectory that is nonlinear, that is self-organized. We don't necessarily understand. And I think that part of where we're at right now is a necessary step on the way to the next place. So devolving, that's the reason why I don't like that word, because I think that don't think that we understand what leads to what leads to what leads to what, right? One reason, I'll give you an example, is anime. I think that anime is I don't know what to call it, but the grand awakening, you know, the waking up of more and more people to the fact that we're not separate, right? The illusion of separation. I think that anime is playing a huge role in that. You know, you take these ancient Eastern cultures that get turned into Hunter x Hunter is one example, and it's all about this kid's hero journey, and he's not necessarily strong enough or big enough for every task, but as a result of the people around him and his staunch willingness to uphold his values, right, which are very much altruistic, which persevere, you know, which don't sacrifice I don't even know what to call it. But without going too deep on explaining the nature of the show, is these animes have deep, deep, deep morals in them. Like, I mean, like deep, deep morals in them. Like unbelievable biblical stories you could draw parallels between, and stories from, you know, the Bhagavad Gita. And of course, this goes back to the idea that there's a collective unconscious, and all these stories kind of arise from the same place. And there is a similar interpretation that you can make across all of the stories that humans create, or there are many sets of interpretations that have patterns that you could draw similarities across. But these animes, you know, on one hand, people would talk about our mass consumption of digital media and too much television, too many TV shows as a bad thing. But at the same time, I have friends and some younger kids that I know that are actually opening up to breath work as a result of watching some of the popular animes that are out nowadays. And it's incredible to me how, time that they spend watching Netflix on their own, disconnected from people, right? Which is one of the biggest problems that we have nowadays, is that people are disconnected. At the same time, they're connecting to energy work, breath work, as a result of these being themes that carry over from show to show to show to show to show. And it's really incredible to me. And maybe this isn't, the all-encompassing example that proves my point, but it's one all example where, on the surface, we could look at something and see it as a detractor from our connection to society and to evolving in a good direction. But on the other hand, there is something that we are unable to witness. There's just something that's going on that we don't necessarily understand and can't capture. We could, like, if we knew that the direction that we were heading in was 100% good, well, we'd be kind of bored. The reason why we're here, I think, a la Alan Watts, is that, if we knew every possibility and we knew how things would always turn out, we'd be so unbelievably bored. We would just get in our own way, which in some ways, existence is like God getting in his own way. God separating himself out into many, 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 many different consciousnesses that can all experience each other and share in shared experience, that have the capacity to get in their own way so that they don't get bored, and that's kind of like, the other part of my mind goes, well, why did things happen? Like, well, what's going on now? The way that we pillage other societies and take their resources and remove them from their connection to ancestral roots and culture that seems to be sustainable and aligned with the earth. Why did Hitler happen? I don't necessarily have the answers to that. But at the same time, like, there's this other part of me that, and this could be like I said, we could all be wiped out tomorrow, and this could be wishful thinking. But the part of the way that I consolidate that in my mind, because we as humans have a desire to try and place things inside of a narrative that is good, is that we only know light. It is only by darkness that we know light, right? It is only by learning that the stove burns when we touch it that we stop touching it. We don't listen to what mom says. That's not how humans are. It's not how it works. As frustrating as it is, it's not how humans work. Otherwise, we'd already be there. We'd already know, and part of this is for experiencing and learning. And so devolving, disconnecting, but at the same time, I'm seeing so many people that are opening up to the other parts of themselves that they didn't even know were available, and the thing is, I think that nature also wants us to be ready. It wants us to be not only living in love and being able to experience the wonderful and splendid nature of life, but it wants us to be prepared in a way that allows us to continue surviving and experiencing. And the fact of the matter is those cultures that we dominated, well, within the grander scheme of life and evolution, they obviously weren't doing it right enough to the point where they could defend themselves. Who knows what the rest of the universe holds? Who knows what the future holds? Who knows what challenges that we may face as a collective species, right? Who knows what's out there that we need to be prepared for? And I hate to say it, I certainly am not justifying anything that goes on. I'm trying to paint it inside of a light where we're not evolving. It's just that evolution doesn't look the way that we think it should. Yeah. And, I think about, for example, to take it back a couple hundred years, maybe detached from where we're at right now, Europe, right? Europe started industrializing and people started living in super, super close quarters. And it was almost like nature's testing ground, a bacterial generation, a disease generation ground, where we developed all kinds of chronic illnesses in addition to infectious diseases that native peoples were completely unfamiliar to and had never been exposed to ever before, right? And then what we did was we came over here, I'll use well, not a lot of people know there's about 73 million Native Americans before we came over. So it wasn't just a few sparse collections of some savages. These were nation states that were all up and down the Americas, right? 73 million people. And at the end of it all, there was only about 3 million left. So I just like to throw that out because it's not a very commonly known statistic. And it's horrible, right? It sounds horrible. But the thing is it's, if you can take the perspective on it that nature, which doesn't have feelings in the same way that we did, was like, well, over here in Europe, we're going to industrialize. We're going to develop really, really great technology that allows for conquering. And at the same time, we're going to create a vicious microbiome that anybody else exposed to would ultimately die off. And if they didn't die off, then great. They're carrying on a gene set that has immunity to it. We came over from Europe and we started spreading that disease. And that's in large part able to take over the Americas. Our technology wasn't that much better. Our war our capabilities weren't that much better at the time, but disease is what ravaged the native populations. And on one hand, it's horrible. And on one hand, I will sit here all day and talk about how wrong it was for the individuals who did what they did to do what they did to the Native Americans. But on a grand evolutionary scale, 1,000 years from now, maybe that was just the great immune building exercise that human beings participated in as a result of the way that evolution unfolds. I don't know. I really don't know, but I'm offering that as a way to try and look at things from a detached point of view where, well, it's horrible that all this happened, but what might this lead to? And I'm justifying it. I'm not here to justify that life works, right? I can't do that for anybody. And I work on doing that for myself every single day. And, looking at horrible things that I'm figuring out, like, is this really all love? Really? How is that possible? But it's only by darkness that we know light. And I think we take for granted the long-term collective learning process that takes place over time. You and I can sit here and we can say, well, the illusion of separation, right? But to permeate all of our culture, maybe we take for granted the speed at which that takes place, And Nietzsche gave us this credit when he said, God is dead, we've killed him. Nietzsche was one of the biggest critics of dogmatic Christianity and religion in general. One of the biggest, most vicious critics. But Nietzsche was willing to say, oh, we killed God. What festivals of atonement will we create that wash away the rivers of blood? What are we going to do now? Because even though we killed God, and even though we're trying to get closer to truth, people are a bunch of crazy monkeys. And we're going to start going a little wild since we don't have this transcendent reason to just be good, right? And that's boiling a lot of very intricate interactions down. But that's basically said, one of the biggest critics of it, and I'm one of the biggest critics of a lot of the things that we do, because I want to see a future where we recognize that we are all connected, in a very practical sense. But at the same time, I try to see where there might be some evolutionary value happen and what it might lead to, because I don't want to fall into the mindset that we're devolving anywhere. It's easy to. I have a much better case that we are devolving than that we are evolving. And as time goes on, and as this world gets crazier and crazier, and as we become more and more disconnected from, the biome of our bodies and the microbiology that's really the foundation upon which all life is built, as we move further and further away from understanding that and more into a realm of hyper sanitization and eradication of various microbes, it's really hard for me to see how we're evolving. But that's where I do my best to hold my judgment and see that this is part of a long-term learning process that I can't understand what leads to what.
Yeah. I think it's definitely interesting. Like, definitely some stuff I agree with, but I would say, like, I definitely think, like, the long term, like, obviously taking the long term view, it's upwards, but I think it also could be the aspect where, like, sometimes to go up 5 steps, you need to go down 30, and like it's kind of like a it's not a straight line up. It's kind of like a dip down, dip up, and like you learn stuff along the way, but like also like it's very speculative. Like, obviously we don't know any of the answers. It's obviously fun to discuss about it, but I like what you said about anime, and I wanted to know, have you seen the show Avatar? Because I watched that during quarantine.
Yeah, I've watched a bunch of I never watched it through, but I watched a bunch of the episodes.
Yeah.
There's metaphors all over the place that people are unconsciously consuming when it comes to interactions between the Fire Nation, the Water Nation, the Air Nation. There's so many lessons everywhere in that show. I think you're about to touch on exactly what I mean when I say that content that we might look at as bad in one way or the other produces results at an unconscious level that are ultimately for the greater good.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I watched that like during quarantine, and like I'm like 20, 21, and that's like a kid's show, and like that was so lit for me to watch. Like I told my dad to watch it. He's in like his 60s. Like he loved it. Like I literally think that's a show that like anybody at any age, because like I wish I watched that when I was a kid, but like that's literally like sure it's branded as a kid's show, but like there is just like so much wisdom in that. Like I remember there was an episode where like they taught Aang how to like open his chakras, like or like balance
Yes.
his chakras. And I was just like, wow, like this is a kid's show. Like no, like these guys are like spitting wisdom in every single episode. And like there's so much going on with like the interactions, and like you have all these characters, like one's like the powerful one and like the feminine aspect, and like the funny guy who doesn't do much, and like the wise mentor and all this stuff. And it's the same thing with the hero's journey on all these shows. But I just thought Avatar was one that was kind of like mixing like the Eastern culture and the Eastern tradition, like you said. And I think that's kind of what we need more of in the West, because like in the East, they're a lot more like, obviously there's a generalization, but they're a lot more spiritual. They're a lot more in touch with nature and society. And it's not always about the profits. And everything here is just about making money, and they don't care if people are miserable, if people are working 80-hour weeks, because all that matters, because their God is money. And I would say that that's a tough thing to do, because what are you going to do when the money's disappeared? What are you going to do when the US currency, obviously this probably will never happen, the US currency disappears and it's all Bitcoin, and you worked 40 years of your life to amount all this paper that has no value other than the value that you defined for it? I think now that I think about it, I think money is a great kind of, maybe not even metaphor, but showing that like something, the value of something is only valuable because people agree that it's valuable. Like gold doesn't have much like intrinsic value. Maybe you could say you could make stuff out of it, or it doesn't get destroyed easily, but it has value because we agree it's worth $3,000 per ounce, or we agree that Bitcoin has $50,000 because that's what we agree on. And that's the same thing with like the meaning of life. Like it can have meaning if we agree for that, but I don't need to agree with somebody else that my purpose here is to do X, Y, and Z. Everybody's going to tell you what you should and shouldn't be doing. And I realize that really just the less you listen to other people's judgments and opinions, and the more you just listen to your own intuition, like the loving wisdom within you, I think just like the more, I don't know how to term this, like the more, not even like right that your actions are, but like the more they just feel right, the more like you just know that they're right. Not to say that there's right and wrong, but there's right. Like again, I'll go back to the law of one. They say like there's two paths, and there's basically the service to self path. Everything you do, like you, and that's where like slavery comes from, like the service to self. You want to like enslave other people to help yourself. And then the service to others path, which is you just want to help people. And one of them, the service to self, comes from separation. The service to others comes from, just like genuinely wanting to help other people. And once I found out about that, I was like, wow, like I'm definitely service to others, and you seem to be as well. But now that I know that this is a thing, I can ramp this up, ramp this up. And I read that book like last year, and just like the amount of impact that I feel like I've had on others through my content and through my art and poetry is like beyond anything I ever could have imagined. And I think it's going to be the same with you. Obviously, when you start posting that good content on all the platforms, every single one.
Yeah. So I what is the utility of money? What are some of the benefits that money provides?
Um, I was also thinking about this the other day, because I don't really think it's basically like the utility is the inconvenience of bartering stuff. But I don't think that bartering is that inconvenient. Like we had like a barter day like in our middle school where like we all came and like traded stuff, and I think it's pretty fun. Like I don't know, I kind of like the idea of bartering things.
Well, I don't know if I don't. So I don't know if inconvenient does it justice. I don't know if bartering or that money gets rid of the inconvenience of bartering. I think that it's a much larger thing than pure inconvenience that money does. What do you think about that?
Uh, I don't really know because I can't really think of like I just think of I don't know. One thing is that like every other species like survives and they seem to do well and they don't have money. So if we're more evolved than them, oh maybe the money is part of evolution, but it doesn't seem to be that way because everybody isn't living equally. Some people are like dirt poor, can't eat, while other people are living in $30 million yachts and are stuffing their face. And I just think that like money was created kind of to control people at a certain level. I don't know what you think about that.
Well, I don't think that money is breeds inequality necessarily. It's the only factor that creates inequality. Inequality is a pattern that we see arise across biological systems, whether they're human beings or whether they're not. And I'm sure that you'd see inequality amongst tribes, although I think that you might find a little bit more balance within a much smaller tribal culture. But so I don't think that money is inequality, right? But within the point that you just made, you're talking about money is what allowed for those yachts, right? So I'm not saying that yachts are a good thing. Maybe that's not the example that we want to roll with, but because that's what you said, we'll take that for example. Yeah, some people, money is what allows some people to be on a yacht, and some people are dirt poor living in a system where they're not, growing their own food and having their land on a communal type environment where they're working with other people. But at the same time, money is also what allows for the experience of that yacht. So what I mean by that well, I don't know. I'll let you respond.
I just think that it's like I always just like think and like write about like a heaven, like a utopian society, and it's just like my belief that if there was a society that was like truly utopian, there wouldn't be such thing as money. There would be like you wouldn't really need currency because I just think about this like 6,000 years ago, I don't know when money was invented. Like if you wanted to eat, you farm your food or you go out and hunt and gather. And obviously that's very inconvenient if you have to do that every day. But the way tribes evolved is that, they said, all right, these are like the big strong people. They're going to go out and hunt. So that's like their unique talent, their unique skill. They're going to use that to help the tribe, help the society. Well, what about the other people? Well, some people can cook because they're not going out and spending all their energy all day hunting. So those people can get the food and then cook it. And then maybe some of the younger people can do stuff also. So I think everybody has a role to play. Everybody has like their unique talents to share. Like I really enjoy like poetry and things like that. And that doesn't have like a utilitarian sense, is that it helps like feed people, but it also helps people kind of like go beyond just what is natural or go beyond what is just like I don't even know how to describe it honestly.
It's a big topic. So let me just get on your side a little bit here in terms of talking about money, right? Because one of the things that affects our moment to moment well-being is a little system inside of us that is essentially keeping track of the likelihood of our survival moment to moment, right? So this system evolved as a result of our place in the tribe, and it evolved to detect other people in your tribe being healthy as an indicator that you will likely survive. And so when somebody was outcasted from the tribe, they would experience extreme fear, uncertainty, super, super high levels of negative emotion. If somebody got outcasted from the tribe, right? The overall sense of well-being that we gained was from the people around us doing well, right? Money has hacked that system, right? Where money, and this is an idea from the book Prometheus Rise by Robert Anton Wilson. And I've got a version that's been edited by Israel Regardi. So this isn't my idea, not that anybody has their own ideas in a vacuum. But the point being is that we've replaced the well-being of the people around with money. And to be more objective about money, instead of giving it this name, right, let's label it for what it acts as within our society. And it is essentially a bio-survival ticket, right? So as instead of your worth to the tribe being predicated on your direct contributions to the tribe, there's a long form convoluted process of supposedly providing value to society, which in exchange for you receive bio-survival tickets. Bio-survival tickets in some ways determine your worth to the tribe. That's at least what the instinctual and unconscious portions of our mind see money as. That's why you see when interest rates rise, they have a direct relationship with the rise of suicide rates, right? When interest rates rise, you see suicides rates rising with them. And up until the rise of social media, the number one demographic for suicide was middle-class working age men. That was the largest, that was the by far and away, they were committing suicide at much higher rates than anybody else. With the rise of social media, it's young women and girl teens. But looking at that, it's like, well, that's interesting. Middle-class working men, right? In reality, in terms of a bare bones survival, it's really hard to die in this society. It's really, really hard to die in this society. You can make it. I mean, even somebody that's homeless living on the street, right? Not that I'm not saying that they're having a happy life, quite the opposite, right? But it's really tough to die. You can find food anywhere. And in comparison to when we lived a tribal lifestyle, food was this sacred thing that we participated in gathering together. And if you were on your own, if the tribe and the well-being of the tribe wasn't there, then your food source wasn't there, right? But we've got this situation where the well-being of the tribe is collectively going down, right? And we're seeing people, killing themselves at higher rates through all types of means. It's not just purely suicide. There's addiction, which ties into mental health and a sense of purposelessness, which is what ties directly into suicide. But it's interesting, you see a guy who's making however many tens of thousands, maybe in the hundreds of $1,000s a year, and he's got a home and he's got a family, but he loses his job and he goes and kills himself. And it's like, that doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. Why did he kill himself? And the reason being is that when we get cut off from our source of bio-survival tickets, it is the same thing as the tribe outcasting us. In reality, there's still a bunch of people around us. We could go live on the street if we really wanted to. But what happens when we get cut off from the supply of bio-survival tickets is that a part of us that's keeping track of our survival or our survival potential, it plummets. And we immediately feel completely worthless. It's the same thing as feeling outcast from the tribe. You get fired from your job. And so I'm trying to make, this is one of the ways that I look at money and the detriments of it is that we've conflated our own well-being with our ability to earn bio-survival tickets as opposed to the well-being of the human beings around us. Yeah. And that's one of my biggest issues with the monetary system, right? But so I'm trying to jump on your team here because I was playing a little bit of devil's advocate and I was trying to ask you some questions, because there is a lot of practical, like money didn't arise for no reason. It didn't, it's technically it's built on the evolutionary process. At what point, are we not still evolving or a part of evolution in the sense that, that's a whole nother topic, but I was trying to give it some credence to the fact that it's here because from a practical lens, from a logical lens, like it makes sense that we would use money as a tool, but money has become something I would say that is replaced our indications of our ability to continue surviving and our well-being. And that's one of the biggest issues that I see with it. But well, just to bring up one thing, I mean, Bitcoin puts a little bit of power back into the hands of people, which is, there's probably thousands and thousands of hours of podcasting on that topic, whether it actually does or doesn't. But if we're switching to another currency, does that change anything? Or are we nestling our sense of well-being inside of a thing that's outside of our communities and the people around us?
I agree, because one thing that I wanted to bring up, kind of, it's still on the same topic of money, is that I don't have any statistics for this, but I don't think that like unhappiness, like I think that people are unhappy that are poor, people are unhappy that are rich. But the thing is, like, you can have sympathy for people who are like poor and unhappy, but it's really hard to have sympathy for people who are like very wealthy and unhappy, because what wealth does is it gives you time. People who are poor can be extremely unhappy because they're going and working a terrible, soulless job every day and working 12-hour shifts to barely feed their family and things like that. And they're doing it. But there are people that are like completely wealthy that their jobs are an absolute cakewalk. And the point I want to make is, like, I see a lot of these TikTokers today. You probably don't know much about this, but these people have like millions of followers, maybe hundreds of millions of followers, for not really doing much, not really adding much value to society other than that, like, they're attractive. Like, they get a lot of followers because people find them attractive. And then they go out and start making like music. Like, I've seen this, like, they become musicians. They don't have much talent, but in their songs, they basically like talk about like being like how depressed they are and like how sad they are. And the thing that I don't get is that it's basically like, how could you be talking about how depressed you are when you're living in a $14 million house in California and you're making millions of dollars a year and your job is posting on social media? Maybe that's not fulfilling to you, but why are you doing it? Are you going to complain about it? Because the problem is that you have 100 million followers of impressionable 14-year-old girls and boys and under, and you're basically molding these people. Oh, if this person's like depressed, oh, is it cool to be depressed? Is it cool to be like emo and all this stuff? And it really worries me, because these are the people with the big influences, and they're rich and they're successful in the eyes of society, but I don't really view them as being that successful if they've gotten all this success and they're still deeply unhappy. They still don't actually love themselves. I don't think of that as true wealth. And I think that's the problem, that our society equates wealth with money. And I don't think money has anything to do with how wealthy you are. Like, there are like people that have no money and just have a lot of love and are able to survive every day, and they work a job they truly love or run their own business, and maybe they make 50,000 a year, compared to somebody who makes $1 million a year but is completely unhappy, hates themselves, and isn't authentic. What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's important to view those people as symptoms of greater cultural underpinnings that are creating them. Like, I think it's really important to not fault those people for the positions that they're in and critique them for the things that they say based on how they feel with the things that they have. They are where they are because the greater web of society put them there. And all those people that are being influenced by them, right? They're just having their own feelings that are already there reinforced. And as much as I want to say that, we don't want to be creating more content that encourages others to be down on themselves and down on life and wanting for more without seeking themselves first, is at the same time that those people are in that position because that's what the culture's feeling, right? I don't fault them for the way that they're making tons of money off of. I don't know the specific examples that you're talking about, but going with the general, scheme that you were speaking about, is people that are talking about extremely depressing things and how they hate their lives even though they have everything, and lots of young people consuming this content. I can't place the fault on them, because without the people that consume content and are drawn to it, they are not who they are. They can't be who they are.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really important to look at these things on a collective level. And I think it's important to call out specific, what would you call it? I think that it's really important to point out when there is a particular action or a particular suggestion that somebody's making that is to the detriment and to the danger of the safety of others, or to, to the detriment of one's well-being if you're consuming it all the time. I think that it's important to point out those scenarios, but I think that it's also important to realize that those people are, whether or not it seems like they should be hurting that much, they are hurting just as much as the people that are listening to them. And this is one place that I really try to take a very very objective approach and try not to place judgment on the thing that is on the surface. Like, you look at a pimple, and I don't mean to compare people to pimples, but it's a freaking metaphor that keeps coming up in my mind. You look at a pimple and you see the little pus at the top, and you're like, ew, gross, the pus. And you pop it to get rid of that, right? And the pimple goes away. But the pus itself is not where the problem was. The pus is the gross state. Ew, that's gross. I don't like that part. But the problem really lies underneath the skin in the microbacterial profile that is taking place. And I mean, that metaphor, you don't even have to it's not even like you have to transfer the metaphor from pimple and then, well, people are the microbacteria that are creating the issue. And then the people on top of that are creating the content that everybody's consuming are the pimple. You can actually just go right to the microbiome as the place going wrong in humanity right now. And here I'm going to be taking from a guy named Dr. Zach Bush, but we talk about, we have a certain opposition to bacteria, virus, fungi, all the various microbes that populate our environment around us. But the reality is that there are more viruses in the air than there are stars in the perceivable universe. There's somewhere around 10 to the 31 viruses in the air, right? And we have this tendency to isolate what we think is the core issue, which is a particular virus or a particular bacteria. And we call that the problem. And we do everything that we can to freaking kill the bug and eradicate it and get it out of here, right? We do this with antibiotics, where we're essentially nuking our microbiome for the sake of getting rid of one particular bacteria, when in reality, the reason why that bacteria has been allowed to fester is not because somebody just happened to come into contact with it for the first time. It's because there's an imbalance in the microbiome. There's an imbalance in the system that allows different bacteria to grow into different sizes at different rates. So anyway, I'm going a little bit out of my wheelhouse here. All that is to say is that the people that you were talking about, I see them as a symptom of the underlying thing that's taking place, that's going on.
Yeah, I really like the perspective you put on there. It definitely helps me reframe it a little. I think that it's more because I feel like I'm the type, I want to find faults and blame. And I guess it's really not these people's faults. It's really what it is the algorithms of these platforms that are pushing content, and they want to push hate and negative content because that gets the most views. But another point I just wanted to make is that I can have a lot of sympathy and compassion for people who are going through depression and anxiety and are in a similar situation as me, and are people who are in a worse situation. But I can't really have much sympathy and compassion for people who are in the upper echelons of society, who seemingly have everything that we want and have a huge platform and could be speaking up and doing this in a constructive way. But what they want to do is basically try to throw their pain at other people to make other people feel bad, because these people look up to them. They look up to them almost kind of like gods, which is crazy, but they want them to say that they're superhuman. And these people kind of play along to it, and they're not truly authentic about what they're going through. They're that's a whole different rant, but I think it's mostly that just most people can understand it from that way. Nobody's going to have any compassion or sympathy, or maybe a little compassion, but nobody's gonna have any sympathy for somebody who's worth $10 million and is sad and depressed. That's really it.
And please keep in mind that I very much resonate with some of the issues that you're pointing out, and I have the opportunity to play devil's advocate here, which I'm playing for myself as well, because I have a tendency to place fault and to place blame and to judge, and I think that comes from perceived ability to understand the complexity of how life unfolds. That's where I think that comes from. But at the end of the day, to play devil's advocate here, those people would not be in those positions if human nature wasn't the way that it was for the taking advantage of. So who's the problem? Is it those people, or is it just those damn humans and their nature anyway? And so it becomes a very slippery slope for me where, it's a slippery slope where if the problem is human nature, well, then that starts tying into, this being a tragedy, unless, right? So those people that, are propagating material. Well, let's take it back to a domain that I can talk about, right? Talk about the church instead of talking about current events. And we haven't pointed out any specific people on social media or that are producing content that is like you are describing. So let's look. He's done some awful, horrible things. But is it the preacher? Is it the priest in the front of the church? Or is it the people that bought in? Because without the people that buy in, that guy doesn't have any power, right? So what is it about? So is human nature itself the issue? Is our tendency to be taken away and swept away by certain manners of attraction, right? Which I think in large part spawn from, mistrust of the self, like, hey, you need to do everything that I say, otherwise your soul is going to go to hell. And what does that mean? Your soul is going to go to hell? Well, some people might say that they're actually worried about where they're going to go when they die. In reality, if we zoom at that a little bit, it means that I'm not worthy. Worthy of what? Who knows? Nobody knows what happens when you die. But the point, the core of that is that I'm not worthy. And so we hear somebody that says that you're not worthy, and then they say that they have a solution, and then we go follow them because we're not worthy, right? And it comes from this function of human nature to receive our value or only believe the value that we have is given to us by external means. And so that is something that I choose to believe we are collectively overcoming. But if I blame the preacher, then I've got to blame the church body too, because that's where he came out of, and that's who gives him his power. And this is the same across any environment, like political system. This is a touchy topic. But we want well, I'm not going to go there.
Yeah,
I'm not going to go there.
I can make another analogy that I thought of. Why? Because when you thought of the church, like that's not really like that applicable to me specifically, but like the education system, like if somebody, because our education system is a very like cookie cutter system. Basically, they make you want to be an employee. They try to kill all your dreams and hope for learning. And my big thing is that like schools should inspire kids to want to learn more. And it's a problem when kids take 12 years of school and they're like almost graduated high school. They're like, I can't take this anymore because the school literally sucked the desire out of them to learn. So they go the rest of their life not reading any books and not gaining any more knowledge. And they don't really grow intellectually, spiritually, mentally, anything. So I understand what you're saying. Like you can't really blame the person for that when like they trusted in the education system and the education kind of stripped everything away from them. But I also look at it from my perspective, and I was that same exact person. And I had basically like my desire for learning completely stripped from me until the point where like I found out that there were books that I truly enjoyed and then I bought them and read them and completely changed my life. But then I also understand that not everybody is in the same financial position as me to be able to buy these books. Because like, I don't know if I ever told you this, but like I won a ton of money on FanDuel once. It was crazy. And then I bought, basically all I did was bought a lot of books with it. And like, that's all I really spend my money on is books, because I think that's the greatest investment. The greatest investment is in knowledge, but that's not what, because our school system doesn't teach that. Our school system teaches that you should read Shakespeare, because if you don't read Shakespeare, then you're dumb. Well, how do I know that he wasn't dumb? Why am I the dumb one? Because I'm 16 years old and I can't understand what this supposed genius said, that nobody can understand what he said. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And so this is where talking about, so I talked about how I didn't like the word devolve, right? But devolve and describing what we're doing right now as devolving is a useful way as a part of this network to try to wake others up to the fact that the practices that we are currently upholding are not leading us to the place that we want to go, right? Part of the evolutionary process is people waking up to, like, the reason why darkness is only by darkness that we know light is because a couple people start realizing that we're participating in darkness and they start leading others towards the light, right? So in the same way, it's important to critique the qualities of a system. What I have a difficult time refraining from, in addition to getting down with, that's funny how it's a contradiction. I have a difficult time not doing this, but at the same time, I'm doing this, or condoning doing it, which is faulting the person as opposed to picking out the disharmonious qualities, right? Because everybody is a product of their nature and their nurture. So I think that it's really important for us to have conversations about the way that money influences things poorly. The education system is derived from an industrial era that was designed to create factory workers and still has the echoes of that, rife throughout it, that does take away from, people's capacity to be interested in learning. I challenge perspective where I try to look at, well, how did that come to be? Not that we had necessarily the best intentions, not that there wasn't malintent that was involved, but what's the reason behind the malintent? What's the reason behind it working to the extent that it has? I really try to take as wide of a view as I can, just in an effort to not start blaming individuals. As opposed to blaming individuals, I look at it that way to try and pick out the qualities that are disharmonious. Yeah. So for the sake of integration, if the other people that we are here living with are the problem, those specific individuals, then we can't integrate. And I'm more interested in integration than I am imposing a set of ethics or a set of rules. Because to impose a set of ethics or a set of rules, you impose the box from which you view the world onto the rest of the world. Whereas with it's funny, the ethic of integration, right? Or the nature of seeking integration is one that seeks to dissolve conflict and create more harmony. And integration seeks to, as opposed to labeling things, right? Capitalist, socialist, communist, because those words, they mean different things to every person and they mean different things on every day of the week. Like, if you're a millionaire in this country, you get 50% of your income taken from you, and people like to call us a capitalist society. It's a total misappropriation of words that is entirely emotionally based. And I understand to an extent what people are trying to get at, but when we label things, we don't talk about their qualities, which is why I like the idea of biosurvival tick than I like the idea of money, right? Because when we list out the qualities, then we can pick apart the qualities that are not conducive to a better lifestyle for everyone, more well-being for everyone. So I guess maybe what I agree on one level with a lot of the essence of what it is that you're saying. What you're hearing in me is a resistance to the way that it's communicated, because I'm always seeking to try to create more fluid communication between people. And if you tend to be somebody that says, well, I think that the more fluid way that doesn't accuse each other, which, look, this is a complicated, topic here, so I'm not going to try and cover everything. I'm just going to say that I try to look at qualities and I try to pick out what qualities are not conducive to integration as opposed to which people are doing the wrong thing. What is the greater quality that contributes to? What is the nature of their message, the way that they're going about it? But I mean, look, man, every day I wake up, scroll through my phone, I think, look at that idiot. Look at that idiot. I was in their position. If I was in their position, it would be so much different. And so I struggle with this internally. Like, this is a back and forth, which is why it's hard for me to articulate myself on this particular topic. But just to offer a different way of thinking about things to whoever might listen to this, the idea of condemning qualities, not condemning. Okay, so Jesus went into the temple, and he saw the tax collectors, and he saw the people that were selling things in the temple, right? And he witnessed all of the sin that was taking place inside of God's house. And what he did is he flipped the tables and he threw the things out, but he didn't harm the people. And he was angry, but he didn't direct it at the people. He was throwing out the things.
Yeah.
Right. And as a metaphor, and this is taking it because I was trying to figure out, which, not group in terms of large social groups like left and right, which group is right. I mean, even smaller groups, which group has it all figured out? Which group has the idea? What do I identify with? And I came to realize, like, identifying, defining something, defining someone, defining yourself. If you break that word down semantically, you are literally defining. You're fine, then you're defining yourself when you define. So I started to seek to move away from labeling people, including myself, and I moved towards labeling the qualities, the results, not necessarily labeling, but calling out, picking out the qualities or the results that took place as a result of, whatever was going on. Anyway, yeah. I don't know which takeaway from that.
I definitely agree with that. It's definitely like a double-edged sword, like I'm going to say here with like the school system, because it's definitely not the students' fault. Like, it's not the teacher's fault, because the teachers have to teach a specific curriculum that's given to them. Like, that's how they maintain their job. And then you can say, oh, well, what about the superintendent? The people, well, they get their curriculum from the state. What about the state? They get it from the federal government. So then you could say, all right, it all comes down to that. But then again, that's kind of taking away our personal responsibility, because pretty much everybody goes through the same schooling system. So then why are there some people that are like me that just start to love reading books after it? And why are there some people that don't? And you can say, well, it could be like your intrinsic desire, motivation, self-discipline. But I think that there's definitely a fine line between like the system itself and then people like being able to take personal responsibility. And by personal responsibility, that doesn't mean doing it all on yourself, but it also means knowing when to ask for help. Again, like, we're taught in our society that asking for help is a sign of weakness. Like, asking for help is a sign of strength. Like, when I was going through my mental health issues, I couldn't speak up. I was too weak. I cared what other people thought about me. I didn't want other people to judge me and think that there was something wrong with me. And then once I finally spoke up and shared it, it's kind of like a huge weight being lifted off of you. But it's also like, wow, like, everybody is going through something similar. There's no reason to just keep it all to yourself. And yeah, I don't know. Like, my computer's honestly running out of battery, but I don't know if you want to say any like last words before I might have to end this one. This has been, wow.
No, look, personal responsibility. Was your computer about to die?
No, I still got like a little, but like that's funny. It's been like 2 hours. I can't believe that it's been that long. That's just awesome.
Yeah, this has been really great. My closing note on what you just said was, it's all about personal responsibility. If anything, I don't even know what I was getting at, but this has been really, really enjoyable. This has been really, really enjoyable. And I'm excited to, geez, man, I don't know if I'll be able to listen to myself talk for 2 hours. Of course, I want to hear what it sounded like and what we said, but I don't know. Hopefully the viewers will find this interesting. I'm playing around. This has been really, really great. And I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. I appreciate, your question asking. You're a wonderful host. You asked some great questions, and I didn't answer them all that directly. And I love some of the things that you had to say. And I got to admit, like, I'm aligned with much of the perspective that you put forth in terms of most of the topics that you brought up. I'm currently, you're hearing me navigate in real time the way that I talk about those things, the way that I look at them and place them, and the way that I seek to go about helping change things, because that's always what I'm constantly trying to do. I'm constantly trying to take on my personal responsibility to be able to see patterns that may be conducive or not conducive to changing things to the better. And then upholding, the patterns that are harmonious, that do seem to work at creating positive change. So you're watching me figure that out in real time, in the way that I speak, in the feedback that I give and how I play devil's advocate and the way that I ramble. Try to be honest here, then I try to explain why I was being honest. Anyway, that's all I got, man. I got no closing notes. Closing notes will turn into another hour.
That's awesome. Well, obviously, you're always welcome back anytime you want. And that'll be it for this episode.